Whenever I'm on Instagram, sometimes I'll be scrolling through the feed. Sometimes I come across the post where a person has put up that Rockefeller quote, the infamous. Hold on, let me turn on this heat. This infamous Rockefeller quote saying that, I need to create a nation of workers and not of thinkers. Something along that line. And then they go about in the caption talking about how public education is evil and how we need to get rid of public education or something along that line. First of all, I'm going to break down this quote. I'm going to critically analyze it for y'all from a historical standpoint. But not only that, I'm going to also talk about why public education during the time of when that quote was made, they weren't even worried about workers. They had two other goals in mind. And I feel like when people put up that quote from somebody who studied education, I'm not saying you need to study education, but from people who they don't even do their research. They thinking looking at 2 or 3 articles online is research. And that's what gives them such a narrow mindset, such a limited palette of knowledge. So let's think about the quote. Like I said, Rockefeller's quote of "I want to make a nation of workers and not thinkers." Well, during the time when he said that, and I understand Rockefeller, I've read a little bit about him. Yeah, I understand he was a little bit of an infamous character. He thought negatively about people. He came from a father who traumatized him seriously, and oh my goodness, what was that? But so I can understand in some way, yeah, maybe he did think negatively about all people. But anyway, people had to think about during that time period of what was being created. During the early 1900s, 1900 on the dot, and even from the late 1800s, was the Industrial Revolution. We needed workers. We needed people in factories working. But you even have to think for yourself too. People talk about how, the school makes us into workers. And I understand there are some things that model the industry, like putting people in rows and you can only be talked to when you need to be talked to, and the ringing of the bell and the grading system. But if you really think about it, half of those people during that time didn't even finish school. I have so many people in my family during the 20th century, they didn't even finish school, and they did exceptionally more better than what I have. My grandfather has a 5th grade education, immigrated to this country when he was a child with a 5th grade education from Mexico, has bought already 2 houses. So I want you to think in that sense. People during that time didn't even finish school. So did it really even matter that he said that? Did his idea of creating a nation of workers, there's no factual proof that he actually created a nation of workers through the public education system. Just because it was set up like an industry doesn't mean that he actually did it. And then also too, just because they weren't critical thinkers, which they were still critical thinkers, they were problem solvers every day of their life. Trust me, they had problems all the time. But you have to also imagine, these people, just because they went through public education, they were still creative beings. They were still singing and dancing and cooking and sewing. They were still going outside and playing. If anything today, that quote resonates more with us because we literally we're not even creative even that. We're not thinking and we're not creative. We can most likely be manipulated in the sense to be workers. Sorry, my nose is running because I'm still getting over a cold, like I've said before, probably 100 times. But that's what I wanted to point out. That just because Rockefeller was he had a goal in mind, in reality, it really did not work. It wasn't, that isn't the 100% of why public education, the goals of public education during that time. Because we needed workers, and economically, people did financially well. definitely during the 40s and 50s when the rest of the world was destroyed, which people forget to talk about that. That's really why the United States did so well during the 40s and 50s economically, because, well, the rest of the world was literally obliterated. But we're not going to talk about that right now. Anyway, let's get into the real reasons of public education. The other two goals that they actually had in mind. During the Industrial Revolution, and we see that in the early 1900s, we're getting this mass horde of immigrants, which the United States have always faced immigration from different periods of time due to whatever the United States has done to cause this immigration. Okay? Sometimes it's not always our fault, but more than likely, it is our fault. But during this time, hold on, there's people coming. So like I was saying before, there was immigrants coming into the country, and they were mostly due to escape the hardships of what was happening in their country and hopefully for a better life, which is the basic typical immigration story you're gonna get. And most of these, during that time period, before I'm gonna say, to understand this is that there's kind of this chart in the way that the United States works. And at the top is you're going to have Anglo-Saxons. Because that was kind of the standard to be. You wanted to be white in the sense of the Anglo-Saxon. The next group are your Europeans of color, which are your Spanish from Spain. You're going to get your Italians. You're going to get your Polish, your people like that. Sorry. And then at the bottom of that list, you're going to have your Asians, your blacks, your Hispanics, and your Irish. The Irish weren't even considered Europeans of color. They were just considered, they were almost, if you look at history and some of the propaganda as well, they're compared similar to black people. So, but anyway, they see this mass horde of people, mostly Southeastern Europeans, which are the Europeans of color, and since the idea is to have them in this basic white standard, what they're going to try to do is assimilate them into the public, and you do that through public education. You teach them about the American history, you teach them English, you teach them they didn't even like Catholics anymore. Like, there were some people, when the Irish came over, they weren't even allowed to go to school sometimes because they were Catholic, and they had to create their own schools with Catholicism in them. Sorry, that was a hard word to say. That was really bad. Sorry. But this goes to show, just because I'm educated, but I ain't educated like that. But they were trying to assimilate people into a white standard. And that's why many people today, too, when they say, oh, well, why don't we say European American? Because at one point in time, American meant white. And so we get attached with the African American because we still show our culture and our race through that first part of it, and then the last part was American. But American Day doesn't mean that anymore. So the real goal was to assimilate immigrants, and the second goal was to urbanize people, which was rural America as well. And for the most part, I mean, it wasn't crazy urbanization, but they were mostly trying to rural America was really spread out, and what they were trying to do with the public education is that they created these schools to be bigger in hopes that they began shutting down these one school rooms and sending all these kids into one school, which was actually completely hard, and some kids decided they didn't even want to go to school anyway, like I said before, because it really wasn't no point to them. They lived their lives on farms, and they had everything they could have in need. But also with that, with the urbanization, for them came factories, which economically did them well as well. Did them good as well. But the hard part that with rural America is that since the end of the 20th century into the 21st century, we can see that our factories have gone away, and that's either because they've been pushed further south due to companies not wanting paying taxes because the tax laws there are more lenient or don't exist, or they've been sent overseas because people over there the companies can treat them much more harshly and pay them less. So that's what that is. But those were the main two goals of public education during the 20th century. And if you wanted to add in to create workers as well, well, you can put that in there. But I think also too, if you think about that, the reason why you could say that public education in a way is failing into the 21st century, including many other reasons, but I think the main big reason is because education has no goal. The system in itself doesn't even have a goal anymore. And if people actually would look, it's not even oh my goodness, I hope I've not been saying publication this whole time. Public education. Oh my goodness. Public education is so much different in a wealthier community than it is in a poorer or in a district where all kids have to go to. And I feel like, even though I understand that we should not segregate children in schools, but I want people to understand, when you have 30 kids in a classroom and 5 of them are reading below the grade level, 5 of them have ADD or some type of other cognitive disability, 5 of them are gifted or highly advanced students in that area or in that subject, and then they're talking about we have to differentiate the material we're teaching kids. I feel like getting into that, public education, if we really want to say public education's goal today, is almost to be a one-size-fits-all. And if you think about that type of goal, it means that schools are now more in the business of just trying to get money. And it's very a shame that you want a teacher to be a one-size-fits-all and you want the school to be a one-size-fits-all. Because, first of all, some of these schools need to be redid. You cannot teach 21st century students in a 20th century, a 19th century school. I'm sorry. Some of these schools don't even have the functioning of AC. Have you seen the Baltimore schools? They were literally when school started, that one year in the summertime, or I don't know if it was the summertime or in the springtime, and the AC was not working. That's disrespectful to them kids. You want a school that is not properly even functioning, and then you say, oh, well, we can just put them on the online schooling. No, some of these kids got cognitive disabilities that parents cannot teach them. They don't have the skills to teach them. They don't know anything about that. That's why we're sending them to a school to get an education. Hopefully that somebody can teach them some type of skill so that they can cope with life, you know. But that's what I feel like. If anything, the goal of public education is to be today is to be almost in a sense it's one size fits all. So politicians or whoever, they don't have to do any work to redo it, which is sad and a shame because public education is not evil. I think the idea of school is really a good idea. And just because those ideas in the past were bad ideas and they had bad intent, does not mean that we have to have bad intents today. And that doesn't mean we have to start ripping our kids out of school to homeschool. I'm not saying homeschooling is bad. There's some people who I've known some homeschool kids. I've taught them, or I've been a student beside of them. They've done exceptionally well in their life. But there's some people who homeschool their kids and know nothing. Literally nothing. They just let their kids run amok. And their child comes back into the public education and their children don't know anything. They don't know how to read. They don't even know how to write their name on a piece of paper. So, what I'm saying is that, one, public education is not bad. And just because Rockefeller said those things in the past does not mean that at one point in time, being a worker was something great. And schools back then were doing much more than trying to create workers. Secondly, schools, we need a goal today. Because we just can't be putting kids into the system. And that's all we're doing. We just put them in there and we just throw them out. Put them in there and we throw them out because it's all about that money. It's not one size fits all, like I said. But thirdly, the last thing I want to say is that before you start posting things, in the sense of, I'm not saying anybody needs any type of degree or education to talk about issues. That's the beauty of America. Like, we can sit down and we can have conversations. But the problem is that nobody correctly does any research. They don't know how to do research. And maybe it's something that should have been taught in school too. But research is more than just scrolling through Instagram or YouTube or reading 2 or 3 articles online. Like, you have to read scholarly, peer-reviewed work. Pick up a book. Learn how to be an active reader. Passive reading through these articles is not the same as being an active reader, because people are supposed to write things to, 1, have a conversation, and 2, to have the reader connect their conversations to other writers' work or other writers' conversations. So, and that's what hopefully I did with this, is I somewhat showed y'all that that's what active reading has done. I connected all them dots, and I'm trying to teach y'all something. I just like to teach people things, and so I hope that y'all learned something today, and I hope that y'all can take this information and go and ask yourself questions. Ask more about public education, ask yourself more about public education, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Just because that's what Confucianism and Socrates wanted their students to do. Just because a teacher and an adult and authority figure is telling you something does not mean you should not ask questions. If you feel like something could be another way, then tell them. Say, well, why can't it be this way or that way? Why does life have to work like this? Wouldn't it be better if it did this? Ask them questions. Don't be taken for a fool. Don't be manipulated. And do that research. Do that research.